everybody. Thank you for joining me today. So this is a requested video. As many of you know, I used to stitch more diagonally, but over the last sort of year or so, my method has changed and I stitch more following the colors. That's why this is called the Colourflow method. Thank you to Lori Clark for coming up with the name. And my basic guidelines are that I try to stitch always connected to work that has already been done. So no floating stitches, as I call them. They need to be connected on at least one side. And I try not to close in any unstitched squares on all four sides. I find it's just harder to keep things neat, harder to get the needle up there. And also I make more counting errors when I leave gaps. So that kind of helps cut down on that. I stitch sort of from the left side, growing out towards the right. You can change direction if you prefer, totally up to you. But yeah, the basic idea is that I leave things open on one side and slowly grow out towards that. Okay, so I'm gonna get started here. So like I said, I follow the colors of the motifs more. So this is a flower that I'm stitching here, and this is sort of one of the petals. It kind of curves this way. And so because of that, I'm gonna kind of follow that curve, even though it will leave sort of a bit of a gap here that we will fill in later, but not a lot. So, all right. All right, and so I stitch two-handed, as I find it's just a little faster for me. So I have my dominant hand underneath my right hand and my left hand on top. And I find that for me, it's just a little quicker. And also I don't get fatigue in my dominant arm from going back and forth from the top to the bottom and back again. Yeah, so I found that I can stitch for longer periods without getting sore if I do that. So I am not someone who crosses their every stitch as they go. Some people swear by that. I just prefer to generally do the bottom legs and then come back and stitch the top legs. But either way works, you know, just do whatever you prefer to do. There isn't a right or a wrong way. This is just my way. So I'm not going to stitch these next ones here because it would box in these two up here. So instead, I'm going to take a look at the colors here and see what I plan to do. Now, I always check the length of what I have already parked, and I will often check the length of what I have for leftover pieces. So because there's a stitch kind of by itself up here, I can either use this thread and cross back and forth, but I'm also going to check and see if I have any short little pieces that are only suitable for a single stitch, because I find then that's perfect for the one that's kind of in the corner by itself there. And I do have a super short piece, but I think I can make it work. It's a little fiddly to work with these little pieces, but I'm a thread miser, so. So I do all of my beginning and ending threads from the front of my work so that I never have to flip it over. I have a video showing how I do that, and I will try to remember to post a link in the description here so that if you wish to check that out, you can. I found that it saves a little time, and also it really helps prevent things from tangling if I'm not flipping it over when I have all these threads attached that have needles on them. Yeah, you really don't want those tangling up on you. So I did this one here in the corner, and then I'm also going to fill in that one there. Okay, so I find that because I have to sort of stop and change colors a lot, it helps prevent me from getting sore from repetitive stress, because yeah, I found when I was sort of stitching all of one color at a time, I would go for long periods stitching the same color, and because I didn't have any breaks, my arms would would complain at me. So I find that this kind of helps with that, and also I'm less likely to make counting errors or miss stitches entirely, because yeah, if there's only one stitch of that color, it can be really easy to forget to fill it in later, which I have done before when I used to stitch without this parking method. So I kind of like that when I reach sort of the end of a square, the whole thing is filled in. There's no stitches I have to search for later. So all right, so grab this one here. So I stitch with multiple needles, as you can see. Other people prefer to stitch with only one. Again, that's just a matter of personal preference. All right, so that one in the corner there is done. So now that I've filled in around that, now I can do this row here of a bunch of stitches without closing in anything. So that is what I'm going to do. So, oops, try not to tie myself in knots here. There we go. Oh, now the knot's on the other side. Oh my gosh. Let's see if we can get you to, there we go. Okay, that's smooth. I'm just making sure, yeah, the end of this thread kind of wrapped around itself. And, oh, it's got a little bit of a knot on it, actually. Yeah, I don't know how that happens sometimes. Oh, I think it may. Oh, it's right at the very end. That's what it is. Okay. So because of that, yeah, the two ends just kind of made a teeny little knot. I'm just going to cut that off. That's better. Now it's not snagging anymore. So I like to work with gridded fabric. I sewed this on myself, but you can buy fabric that is already gridded for you. Just, I did not know it existed when I bought a whole bunch. So I do it myself. But yeah, some people prefer to not work with a grid. It's, again, totally up to you. I just find it's easier for me to have that cross check. I'm less likely to make mistakes. And when I do make mistakes, I can find where I made that mistake much more easily. My other rule that I didn't mention earlier is that I always park in the same place. It is always in the upper right of where I will be using that color again. When I first started parking, I did some in the lower left, but then the problem was I would sometimes end up with two threads of different colors coming from the same hole, and it was hard to tell sort of which one was supposed to go in which direction. So that is my one hard and fast rule, is that I always park in the same spot. Because, yeah, it just cuts down on the confusion. Now, I'm stitching from the app here. It's called Pattern Keeper for Android. I would not stitch without it anymore. You can still do this with paper, you know, if you're willing to mark on your paper pattern where you have parked your threads for the next stitch. There's also some other, there's markup, I believe it's RXP or XRP, something like that, that works on Apple devices as well as Android. I haven't used it myself, but I know a lot of stitchers love it. So, like I said, an app is not required for this kind of stitching, but it does make it a lot easier. So, all right, I'm going to look at this threads here. Okay, so got a shorter piece here. So again, I don't want to stitch this stitch that's right there because it's, as I said, floating, right? You could, but I don't like to do that, as I make more mistakes that way, and I find that it's just a little neater. It's easier to stitch without snagging threads if they're not left sort of floating off by themselves to fill around in later. So even though this is slightly less efficient to do this one here in the corner and then to go to the other corner and then back, it's not a lot, and I prefer to do that because it's just a little neater for me. And again, like I said, I make fewer mistakes. I've done before where I've done the floating stitch and then discovered later as I was filling it in, it was off by one. Then I have the decision of, do I leave it? Do I pull it out? Do I fix it? You know, and yeah, it gets very frustrating, especially if you've stitched through it with a lot of other stitches. Undoing it later can be a real pain because it gets snagged. So that is why I'm doing it that way. So I'm not going to do this row yet because it will extend past by one and close in the stitch above it. So I'm instead going to pick up this thread and work with it. So there is occasional closing in, but I find that because sort of I stitch around the motifs, if there's any tension lines, they're sort of right over on the edge. And so you can't really see it. If it's sort of around the edge of the flower, it's harder to tell. And this method that I do, I find also helps to prevent lines in your work, which can occur when you always stop and start in the same place. So that is why also I do this, because I'm not stopping in the same spot every row. It's less likely to pull to either side and cause a tension line, as some people do end up with that problem. So I find this can kind of just help avoid that. Some people, like I said, like to cross as they go. They swear by that to avoid lines. I haven't had a problem with lines by not doing that, but again, that is something you might want to try if you have been having trouble with lines showing up in your work. Yeah, I find with the grid lines, it cuts down on how much counting I have to do, because I don't have to count how many stitches I'm doing in a row here. I just know I stop when there's one stitch before the grid line. So I often say I don't really have to count any higher than 5, because you're always 5 away from one grid line or another in each big square. So okay, so I'm just going to take a look at what I got here. So I will carry my threads as far as 1 inch, really no further than that. I find that that just ends up using more thread than stopping and restarting, but within 1 inch I will carry. So I will do those as well, because they are not, again, going to close in any stitches yet. So do these two, and then I will park it, and I'm going to unthread it because it's going to be a while until I get to doing that spot. So I only leave needles on threads when I'm expecting to use them again fairly soon in a section. Don't want to get too many, as I find then you end up with problems of it tangling. Okay, so again, I have 2 threads here of the same color. That happens when colors tend to branch off from each other. I will use separate threads rather than the same thread crossing back and forth across the work. So they're both fairly long. So I'm going to stitch with one here, do this stitch there. All right, and then switch colors again. So again, I have 2 threads because one is curving this way, one is going across that way. So that's why I chose to split them up like that. Now, if I wished, I could also stitch this 3rd stitch as it's not, like I said, floating. It's still connected on one side, but I'm just going to pause and change colors. But it is totally fine if you would not wish to do that. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. So I've had people ask, do you have problems with threads tangling? Generally, no. Most of the time, if you're patient with it and don't sort of pull them too hard as you're untangling them, you can get them to let go. I've only had maybe 2 or 3 times that they tangled so badly that I had to cut a couple of threads. But yeah, that is very rare. So that was something I was kind of concerned about myself when I first decided to try parking. But yeah, I've discovered it actually has not been much of an issue the way I worried it might be. Okay, so as you can see, I like to finish with what they call pin stitches. Just find it cuts down on the bulk across the back. I will sometimes still draw threads across the back when, say, I'm using a very dark color and there's going to be a light color next to it. Then I will not pin stitch because I don't want it to potentially show through. But otherwise, I find they're very secure. In fact, the pin stitches I found is even more secure than the ones I drew across the back of other stitches. Because I carry the pin stitch a little ways away, it also gets stitched over later by other threads, and so that makes it extra secure. I, of course, do not do that when I am near the edges of the pieces. I don't want the ends showing past there, but okay, I got this little tool here. This is called a snag nabbit tool. It's actually for knitting to fix snags on it, but it works really well when you have something like this. I got an end here from the back that's coming up, and so it's like a needle but with no eye. It's got a roughened edge, and it just sort of helps grab that end of the thread and make it come back to the other side so that it's no longer showing. It wasn't very much, just a couple of dollars, and it's one of my favorite stitching tools. Because yeah, otherwise I find sometimes if you're trying to just make it go back with thread, for some reason you can pull it up to the right side with one pull, but trying to make it go back is so frustrating. It takes multiple and doesn't want to go back. So this piece is too short for me to bother really parking anywhere and continuing to stitch with it, so I am just going to tie it off. Okay. I'm just going to kind of look around at what other parts of this color I'm going to decide to part this one right here. So this thread will carry off this way when I get to it, and I'm going to have another thread to go the other way for the other colors. So So if I wanted to, I could continue stitching with this and then fill in above it later, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to check the length of this thread here. Okay, so I'm going to get a short little one to work from the left-hand side. So the two threads are going to sort of work towards each other and back. And I'm going to stitch, I'm making my cutoff point right around here. That's just sort of as much as will fit comfortably in my frame. So, and the color, there's kind of a flower petal that sort of curves that way, and so I'm going to kind of follow it that way when I get there. So I'm not always left with straight lines, generally not actually, but like I say, I kind of prefer that because it helps to avoid any lines showing up in my finished work. Okay, so mark that. So okay, and then I'm going to park this here for now. I could, again, do these 2 stitches because they're not going to be floating. They're still going to be attached, but I am not going to. And again, that's just because that's how I feel. Sometimes I might continue to work on that, but instead, I'm going to do this 1 stitch here and tie off this thread. Yes, I've also had people ask me, how do I cut the threads without looking? I pinch right up against the fabric, and then I just clip below that. And that way I'm only cutting the 1 thread that I actually want to cut and not any other threads, because yes, obviously you do not want to be doing that by accident. So again, that's another way to avoid having to flip my work over. Saves time and tangles. Okay. All right, so I'm going to head back over and start filling out again. As I said, this color kind of curves around here, and so I'm going to follow that curve and not stitch in this stuff yet until I've sort of filled in the rest of this flower petal here. So again, I have 2 threads of the same color. Just take a look. Okay. Yes, because where I decide to travel each thread and park each thread depends a lot on how much there is left of it. If there's only enough to do, 1 or 2 stitches, then obviously it doesn't make sense to park it in an area that needs a ton of other stitches done. So yeah, I can't always just look at the pattern and decide what I'm going to do, because it often is affected by factors like that. How many stitches I have to do and how long the thread I have to do them with is. So. that. So as I said, I try not to close in stitches, but sometimes it does happen when following the colors because of the way the shapes they make on the pattern. You will end up with a little bit, but not on all four sides is my main rule. So I stitched that one. So yeah, there's pink colors here, and then there's going to be some darker, I think, blues coming up here. I will not be stitching the blues yet. I will be leaving them for later. Because I found when I was stitching more in diagonals, I would end up with so many different colors sometimes across a section when they changed because of a different motif, so different part of the picture. So I would end up with a lot more live needles, and then it was easier for them to get tangled. So that is why this is slowly sort of morphed this way. I'm a little more relaxed in the way I stitch. Some people I know are very disciplined. They go row by row, you know, and they never deviate, but I am not that disciplined. Yeah, there's many ways to park, and I often say, you know, watch a bunch, try different methods, find what works for you. I think everybody's method of parking is slightly different. I used to sort of try to force things to stay in a diagonal direction, but this piece that I'm working on, the peacock is standing and his tail feathers are going the other way, and so I found I was fighting it, and it was becoming less enjoyable to stitch, so I decided to just go with it. And that made it more fun for me. So that is one blue one here. Just said I wouldn't be stitching, but I think I might just do the one. See, like I said, they're guidelines, not rules, because I will change them when I feel like it. Okay. So did that one. I will come back later to fill in this sort of area here. For the moment, I'm going to just stick with this one that's curving over this way. Okay. So yeah, as you can see, I try to grow out from the established stitching. Like I said, this means I make fewer counting errors. I will, of course, still make them sometimes. That's unavoidable, but it makes them less likely to occur for me. Okay, do that. Don't want to stitch any of my hairs into the, the piece. So as you can see, I did a bunch of pin stitches here. They're getting covered up as I stitch this part, so they're no longer visible, and I am they are a bit more secure as well. Okay. Once again, there's a bit of a fuzz coming from the back there, so just tidy that up. So yeah, I've often said that this way of stitching kind of feels like I'm doing a puzzle, which I do enjoy. So again, going a little out of order here because I haven't done all the stitches that are to the left of that one, but like I said, I'm going to get to them later. So that is sort of where I've deviated from my previous. Ooh, that's no good. Went between these threads here, I think. Nope, did it again. Let's gotta be careful not to do that. So yeah, sort of in order to do all of these stitches, I would end up with a whole bunch more live needles, and I just found that that slowed me down a lot and caused more tangles, so that is why I've switched to this. Still not closing in on all four sides, so I still find it fairly neat. Okay, do those two. So they are right up against that edge there. I believe I had this one threaded already. Yeah, I did. So I will work with it. This piece is really short, but I think it's enough that I can get this one last stitch out of it when I get there. Yeah, now when a thread is really short, I generally will not leave the needle on it, as I find it just falls off when I'm trying to pull the thread back out to use it again. So yeah, there's just not much point in leaving it there. Okay, these two are done here. As you can see, slowly growing out. It isn't a perfect line because the shape of this color isn't perfectly straight on the pattern, so I'm just going to follow it. So that is sort of the difference between my previous diagonal method and what I'm stitching now, and obviously I'm not stitching in diagonal. So sometimes I end up stitching more horizontally and sometimes it's more vertical. It depends on the shape the colors are making on the pattern. That's how I decide to do it. Just whichever way seems to sort of follow the way the colors flow across the pattern is the easiest for me to do, so that's what I end up doing. And as you can see, if you look at the pattern, the symbols change right here as it's a different color, so that's why I'm making the cutoff there. I'm going to finish sort of this flower petal and work that on later when I get to it. So I find using a spare needle is sort of the easiest way for me to pull my threads free of the others. So I hope that's becoming clearer to you all. If you have any questions, please drop me a comment. I will do my best to answer them. So yeah, I have 2 strands in this area. I kind of don't really need 2. It's just sort of, they branched off and sort of came back together here. So what I might do is tie one of these off, save the leftover pieces for elsewhere. So yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do, because I don't need both. I'm just going to, so I did these 2 stitches. I'm just going to tie this one off and carry on with the other thread of that color. And then yeah, I saved those pieces that were left because there's still enough to do some more stitches with those. So I save them for when I have an area where there's only, 3 or 4 stitches of that color. Those pieces would be perfect for it. So this is one I could have decided to do multiple threads, but actually I can do it with 1 thread, so I will, without too much crossing back and forth across the back. So that is what I'm going to do. Do this one here too. Park. So I find because I leave my needles on the threads that I'm using, it really doesn't take much time to sort of drop 1 thread, pick up the next one, do the stitches, switch to the next one, that sort of thing. Yeah. And again, I'm going to sort of curve down more a bit instead of having a sharp straight line there. I'll fill in what's to the left of it later. So that's the way that it kind of differs from my previous tutorials. That's sort of what's changed since then. Kind of like how all this sort of chaos of the attached threads slowly turns into, ordered, neat stitching. Yeah. So people will look at this and think it looks very intimidating with all the threads attached, but once you understand how it works, I find, at least to me, it became less intimidating because you are still really only stitching with 1 thread in your hand at a time. The others are just waiting for you to get back to them when you're ready. So I think it kind of looks more complex than it actually is. So again, we're still within that inch, so I am going to park this over here, and I'm just double checking with my grid lines. I try not to park sort of based on what is already parked there. So I did have a thread parked here, and I could just say, okay, 1 above, but I want to make sure that it's in the right place, because if I parked this one wrong and then I park a whole bunch based on it, then they're all going to be wrong. So yeah, I kind of try to double check with the grid lines. I find that makes me less likely to mess it up. Okay, so do all these along the edge here. This piece is going to run out soon, but it will be enough for 2 stitches here. But first, of course, I'm going to do these ones nearby so that there's less closing in. New color here. All right, so looking at what I have here, we've got this one stitch sort of over by itself. So I'm going to do it with its own thread, as I have a really short one. And then when I do the rest of that color section, I'm going to start a big one and sort of bring it over from the other side, because sort of the shape of that big block of this color, it makes more sense to me to do that. So rather than trying to do it all with one thread and skipping around, I'm instead going to do this with this thread here, this short little piece, and then do a new thread again later. So this time I'm going to draw across the back because this is a really dark color. Just worry about it showing through. So, so I can do that from the right side as well. The first few times I did it, I would turn my work to make sure that I had caught enough of the threads, but I found that once I'd done it a few times, I could feel from how much resistance there was on the needle as to whether I had caught enough threads or not. And then that way, now I never have to look. Okay, this one came unthreaded. So I've also had people ask how I can thread so quickly. My first thing is I bought needles that have quite long eyes, so that makes it easier. And then I just pinch the thread between my finger and thumb and kind of push the eye of the needle onto it, rather than sort of trying to push the thread through the eye. Yeah, I find that it kind of keeps it a little bit firmer, and then it doesn't sort of fold over and, you know, not go through the eye of the needle, because that's annoying, right? I find that also doing that means I don't have to lick my thread. You know, nothing wrong if you prefer to do that, but there are, you know, digestive enzymes, and I just worry that it would break down the fibers over time. So that's why I broke myself of that habit. But no shade to you if you do. You know, I did it for years. So yeah, so I kind of split this color up here into this section here. And my thread is going to run out by the time I am done. And then I'll have a new thread for the other side of this block of color there. So rather than sort of traveling all around, closing in those stitches above it, I am splitting this into 2 parts, 2 threads. So I have said that I don't cross as I go. However, if I would want my thread to end up on the other side instead of back where I started, I will cross as I go sometimes to accomplish that. So if this thread had been longer and I would want to keep using it for the rest of the block of color, I would have done that. But since it's going to run out pretty much exactly when these stitches run out, I did not see a point in doing that. So yeah, as I said, you can see by looking at the symbols below this, they are different colors because I believe this is where the big pink flower ends. This is where sort of different purple flowers are starting to come up below it. And so that is why I'm dividing the work there. I will do those purples later when I get to them. So yeah, not perfectly straight, following the shape of this petal, but that is what sort of keeps me on a more even rhythm, I think. So actually first I'm going to do this single stitch here. Yeah. Then I'm going to take a look at what I've got to work with for the next symbol and what is already attached. Okay, so yeah, I have a thread attached here. Yes, that's right. I decided one was going to go this way and the other one was going to go like this and down that way. But at the moment, I'm not going to stitch that one. I'm just going to carry on filling in this, and then I will go back over and start working some other colors there. Okay. Then, yeah, if I remember correctly, this will be only enough, yeah, to do these 2 stitches here before I need to add a new thread. So again, using a shorter piece for these stitches here, because I'm going to attach a different piece to curve down the other way to do those stitches there. So Okay. So yeah, I'm going to have the one thread along here, and I'm going to have another thread doing the other colors on the other side. There we go. So I'll start a new thread like I said I would. Another one that's probably not totally full length, yeah. So yeah, the one comes up this way and the other one curves around the other way. But of course, I'm only going to do this one stitch here because the other stitches of this color are not yet attached to anything. So I will be doing them later. So there's a big section of this color coming up. So I will use this thread for a while until it runs out, just for part of the stitches. I'm not going to go any further over to the right at this point because this is where I decided to make my cutoff because I want to shift the whole frame over when I'm going to work those. So okay, so looking ahead here. Okay, so I don't want to do this one stitch below yet because like I said, it would be floating off by itself, not attached. So I'm going to do a little bit more skipping around, but this way I don't have to do sort of two separate threads. So I'm going to attach one of that color, a shorter one, and it will do the stitches from that side. Oh, maybe not. I don't have any shorter ones left, so in that case, it'll just have to be a long one. So again, I won't do all of the stitches of this color here yet. I'm going to divide them up so that I can do without closing anything in. So it just pauses and parks until I do some other stitches, then I pick it up and stitch with it again. So yeah, like I say, it looks more complicated than it is. Parking is just saying, I'm putting you here for now. I will get back to you later. So did those so that I can do all three of these without closing anything in. Yeah, I tried to leave that threaded, but it was a bit too short. Probably shouldn't have bothered. So I said earlier how I sewed on these grid lines. Do not use ordinary thread to do that. Is my recommendation. I have done it, but removing it later is a big pain. This is called the Sulky Sliver Monofilament thread, and it's really nice because you can't pierce it with your needle, so it slides right out afterwards when you want to remove it. I have never had a problem with removing it, and I've done, oh, I think 4 full coverage pieces with it, and it has not been a problem. So yeah, I try not to stitch over it, but even if you do completely stitch over it, it is not a problem. You can remove it later. I have never had an issue with it. So I could choose to park this sort of on this side of this run and cross as I go. I decided to just park it that side so I can go back and over and end up on that side. Either way works. I've had people sort of ask, why did you decide to park on, this side versus the other? And it's like, because I had to pick one, so I just did, But if you chose to do the other side, that would work too. Okay, so then, like I said, I was going to start a new long piece of thread from the other side to work this big block of color. But again, as you can see, it's got other colors kind of interwoven into it. So again, I'm going to divide it up, work part of it, park it, and then work around it before I get back to it. So can you guess what I'm going to do? Which path I'm going to take? So yes, I'm going to do that row there, around that edge. A knot. Yeah, I could feel the snag. I apologize for my voice. We kind of had a bit of colds here in the house for a couple of days, so yeah, that's why it's a little rough. that row, and then I'm going to do those 2 rows and then park it. Once again, if I pull the thread and it's suddenly shorter than it should be, that usually means there's a snarl on the other side. It'll often just feel wrong too. I kind of use my finger of my hand that's underneath to kind of run along the bottom every now and then and just make sure there's no lumps and bumps where there shouldn't be. 'Cause yeah, the sooner you catch a knot, the easier it is to undo it. I think I was off there. Yeah. Pierced the fabric in the wrong spot, so the leg of that stitch was a little too long. Okay, and park this right here. Okay. One of the other colors that's kind of interlocking with this color. So I'm going to kind of do these here along this edge and travel back up. Because I want my thread to end up back where I started. Because as you can see, there's more stitches up here in the next area, but I've made my cutoff before that, but I'm going to park the thread there so that I can use it rather than having to attach a new one when I get there. So do this. Tie off this one. I think I will actually park this down here. Yeah. Park that there. So yeah, I did that so that I could do this stitch here, park it up here to use when I'm doing that area, but I'm not right now, so I'm just going to unthread it. Okay. So yeah, as you can see, I followed the shape of this flower petal here. Even though it didn't make a perfectly straight line because the colors were making that shape, so I followed it. Goodness, ends keep want to hang around there. Unthread this because I'm not going to be working this big block of color yet. I'm going to work on it later when I get there. So I say I generally don't cross as I go. However, when it's a single line of stitches kind of along an edge like this, I often will. I don't do exclusively one or the other. I just do what works with what I'm doing at the time. So again, this is not very long, so I'm not going to bother parking it. I'm just going to tie it off. These threads here, I'm not going to be using them for now, so just setting them aside. So I'm going to finish out this curve here of this petal, and then I'm going to go back over to the left and start working the next sort of motif there, another flower or whatever it is that it happens to be. there. So yeah, we went from a whole bunch of threads to having them all tied off or parked further away. So like I said, chaos to neatness. So like I say, I often don't leave threads this short with the needle still on. However, I knew I was going to be getting back to this right away, so in that case I did. And I think actually, yeah, I might as well finish this one off as well. Oh, that was already threaded. Whoops. There we go. When the ends get a bit worn and fuzzy, it's harder to thread, so give it a little trim and then it's easier. All right, so I did all that. So now I'm going to go back over to this side here, and I'm going to carry on with the other colors that are here. So I would probably work on this area here, then start doing the next color here, because there's sort of a color flow that curves this way. So I would probably work across it like that until I get sort of to that edge, come back over here, do the same thing. So I hope that that makes that all clear. If you have any questions, please just drop a comment. I'll do my best to answer them. And thank you so much for joining me today.